Morning. Good to see everyone this morning. For those who are perfect daily Bible readers, right under your pew, there's a fruit basket. Hopefully you guys enjoy that. No, I'm just joking. I'm joking. Anyway, I was going to say, the person who put them there would obviously be Terry. Put them really nicely under your pews if we did that. Maybe next time. But appreciate you guys too for reading our Bibles daily. It's always something very good to do. Thank you for the encouragement, even to our youth as well. This morning we're going to be in John chapter 11. We're pretty much finishing up John chapter 11. And we're going to be in John chapter 11, verse 45. John chapter 11, verse 45 through 57. Kind of get us up to speed where we're at. We're going to read this passage here. We'll read verses, kind of catch up where we're at. We'll read verses 1 through 44. And we're talking about Lazarus. He's coming to, not right away to help Lazarus, but he comes a few days later. And as many of you know, he passes away. But Jesus, he raises him from the dead. So let's notice this. Starting in verse 1, it says, "Now a certain man was sick, Lazarus of Bethany, the town of Mary and her sister Martha. It was that Mary who anointed the Lord with fragrant oil and wiped his feet with her hair, whose brother Lazarus was sick. Therefore the sisters sent to him, saying, Lord, behold, he whom you love is sick. And when Jesus heard that, he said, This sickness is not unto death, but for the glory of God, so the Son of God may be glorified through it. Now Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus. So when he heard that he was sick, he stayed 2 more days in the place where he was. Then after this he said to the disciples, Let us go to Judea again. The disciples said to him, Rabbi, lately the Jews sought to stone you, and are you going there again? Jesus answered, Are there not 12 hours in the day? If anyone walks in the day, he does not stumble, because he sees the light of this world. But if one walks in the night, he stumbles, because the light is not in him. These things he said, and after that he said to them, Our friend Lazarus sleeps, when I go, that I may wake him up. Then his disciples said, Lord, if he sleeps, he will get well. However, Jesus spoke of his death, but they thought that he was speaking about taking rest and sleep. And Lazarus said, Then Jesus said to them, finally, Lazarus is dead, and I am glad for your sakes that I was not there, that you may believe. Nevertheless, let us go to him. Then Thomas, who was called the twin, said to his fellow disciples, Let us also go, that we may die with him. So when Jesus came, he found that he had already been in the tomb 4 days. Now Bethany was near Jerusalem, about 2 miles away. And many of the Jews had joined the women around Martha and Mary to comfort them concerning their brother. Then Martha, as soon as she heard that Jesus was coming, went and met him. But Mary was sitting in the house. Now Martha said to Jesus, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would have not have died. But even now I know that whatever you ask of God, God will give you. He said to her, Your brother will rise again. And Martha said to him, I know that he will rise again in the resurrection and at the last day. And he said to her, I am the resurrection and the life. He who believes in me, though he may die, he shall live. And whoever lives and believes in me shall never die. Do you believe this? And she said to him, Yes, Lord, I believe that you are the Christ, the Son of God, who is to come into the world. And when she had said these things, she went her way and secretly called Mary, her sister, saying, The teacher has come and is calling for you. And as soon as she heard that, she arose quickly and came to him. But Jesus had not yet come into the town, but was in the place where Martha met him. Then the Jews who were with her in the house and comforting her, when they saw that Mary rose up quickly and went out and followed her, saying, She's going to the tomb to weep there. Then when Mary came where Jesus was and saw him, she fell down at his feet, saying to him, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. Therefore, when Jesus saw her weeping, and the Jews who came with her weeping, he groaned in the spirit and was troubled. And he said, Where have you laid him? And he said to him, Lord, come and see. And Jesus Then the Jews said, "See how he loved him." And some of them said, "Could not this man who opened the eyes of the blind also have kept this man from dying?" And Jesus, again, groaning in himself, came to the tomb. And there was a cave, a stone laying against it. He said, "Take away the stone." And Martha, the sister of him who was dead, said to him, "Lord, by this time there is a stench, for he has been dead 4 days." He said to her, "Did I not say to you that if you would believe, you would see the glory of God?" And they took away the stone from the place where the dead man was lying. Jesus lifted up his eyes and said, "Father, I thank you that you have heard me. And I know that you always hear me, but because of the people who are standing by, I said this, that they may believe that you sent me." Now when he had said these things, he cried with a loud voice, "Lazarus, come forth." And he who had died came out bound, hand and foot, with grave clothes, and his face was wrapped with a cloth. He said to them, "Use him, and let him go." So noticing here, Jesus gets a messenger from Martha and Mary that Lazarus is sick. And of course Jesus says that he's going to wait. He waits a few days. Now, of course, they wait a few days, and he decides to go. So the disciples said, "Well, Lord, isn't it kind of unsafe to go down there, especially near Jerusalem? They're trying to kill you." Of course, Jesus encourages them, "You're with me." And after that, of course, he continues. He goes down. One of the sisters meets him, and we can imagine, and we talked about it before, that this is, in many ways, it's a lesson of, how do we deal with death? How do we deal with, especially for the loved ones who passed away. And the reason, again, that Jesus allowed Lazarus to pass away, not, heal his sickness, was to bring glory to God. Notice there in verse 4. And that's really hard to understand. But it was, again, for those who believe, even his own disciples, to believe him. But he goes, one of the sisters meets him, and she even still has faith, And we talked a little bit about that, how sometimes maybe even bitterness can turn us away from God. But even these sisters, still have faith in him. Another thing that I pointed out last time is that John makes a really good emphasis that Jesus loved them. He loved them all. He didn't hate them. He loved them. He loved Lazarus. He loved Martha. He loved Mary as well. And there wasn't no will. It wasn't that Jesus, loved them or anything. He did love them. And John makes an emphasis. Very good. But he gets there, and of course it's already been about 4 days, and he tells them to move the stone. And many of them don't really know what's really going to happen, because this hasn't happened before. Jesus hasn't raised anyone from the dead. He's healed people, but he hasn't literally raised anyone from the dead yet. So he does this, and of course Lazarus comes forth, and we're going to kind of see now the reaction with everything. And we've already talked about, and Jesus makes it very clear that, he is the resurrection, he is the life, and Jesus proved that. He proves his power over death, and he is that giver of life, calling Lazarus forth. And even though Lazarus was in the tomb for 4 days, he still came forth. Even though his body was decaying, Jesus still raised him from the dead, probably healed those things upon his body. But Jesus did these things, again, to show for those who believe in God, again, even his own disciples, verse 15 and 42. But now noticing here, he calls forth Lazarus to come out. And in John chapter 11, verse 44, we see Lazarus, he comes out of that tomb, he's bound in these burial clothes, and he lives. And you think about that, that must have been something very amazing. It would have been Elijah, especially for Mary and Martha, to see their brother again. Because the last time that we talked about this, Jesus told, I think it was Martha, that you will see him again. And of course, Martha was a little confused. She thought, at the end of time, But Jesus was talking about, no, you're going to see him pretty soon. So now we're going to kind of notice now in verse 45 through 47. Now notice this reaction, and in many ways, I guess you can say a crisis among some other individuals who do not like Jesus at all. So noticing here, starting in verse 45, it says this, Then many of the Jews which came to Mary and had seen the things which Jesus did believed on him. But some of them went their ways to the Pharisees and told them what things Jesus had done, and gathered the chief priests and the Pharisees a council, and said, What do we? For this man doeth many miracles. If we let him thus alone, all men will believe on him, and the Romans shall come and take away both our place and nation. So we see here in verse 45 that many of the Jews did believe. It was accomplished in many ways what Jesus was trying to do. He was trying to see people, he was trying to get people to see God's glory, and many of them did believe. But, there was no trick happening. Nothing could be more powerful to show who Jesus is, that he is truly the Savior of the world. He is the Son of God. He is the resurrection and the life. This is he. From many of those who have prophesied about him. But even though many believed, there were some who what? What does it say?
They were angry.
Yeah, they were angry. There were some who did not believe. There was even some who...
It was interesting. They were worried that the people would believe and the Romans would take them. And the Romans did take Jerusalem and kill the nation. Those very scribes and Pharisees were slain. Their own words came to life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but it really came back on them. We thought they were going to control the whole situation. But the word got back, it got back to those of the Pharisees in Jerusalem. They told them what Jesus has done. So noticing here that we see this wording here, the Sanhedrin council. In verse 47 it says, And gathered the chief priests and the Pharisees in a council, and said, What do we? For this man doeth many miracles. Now, as I kind of shared a little bit last time, the council was a ruling body of Israel in civil, criminal, and religious matters. And these were the guys who were kind of controlling everything, kind of said what was going to happen. And now, it seems to them that they kind of have a crisis on their hands. Many of them are kind of now just kind of, shaking in their boots. And they ask amongst themselves, what shall we do? What should we do? That's a really good lesson right there. Doing the comparison here. Them asking this question, what are we going to do with Jesus? That's one option. Or the other option is Acts chapter 2, verse 37. Men and brethren, what shall we do? There's something good that you should do, and there's something that you can do. Accept Jesus, do things that He is required of you, or you can either reject Him. And that's something else down the line. So again, they don't know what to do. What they're talking amongst themselves, and they're worried about these things. In verse 47, they say, If we let him thus alone, all men will believe on him, and the Romans shall come and take away both our place and nation. Noticing that it's a big problem for them. If this guy continues going around doing miracles and raising people from the dead, then we're gonna have a problem with the Romans. They're going to hear about this, and they're going to come, and they're going to take away our position of power. They're even going to come take our nation away. But rather than looking at who Jesus is and truly being amazed and truly accepting that Jesus is the Son of God, rather they just reject it. They reject everything so far for what Jesus has done. So again, what are we going to do? How are we going to handle this problem? So noticing here in verse 49 to 50. And one of them, named Cephas, being the high priest that same year, said unto them, Ye know nothing at all, nor consider that it is expedient for us that one man should die for the people, and that the whole nation perish not. Notice this individual here that's coming into the scene. You have this man named Cephas. Cephas is the high priest at that time of Israel, and he has a solution. His solution is that it's better for one person to perish than for the whole nation to perish. Think about that. What are they saying? Saying someone has to die for the many. And they're looking at Jesus. If we kill Jesus and we can keep doing what we're doing, if we do not kill Jesus, then we're going to lose everything of what we have. We're going to lose all authority and power. But noticing here, John tells us something very interesting in verse 51 and 52. In verse 51 and 52, he says, "And this spake he not of himself, but being high priest that year, he prophesied that Jesus should die for that nation, and not for that nation only, but that also he should gather together in one the children of God that were scattered abroad." Noticing here, little did Cephas know that his words were quite prophetic. How true it is that God, in God's eyes, he saw that it was better for Jesus, the Son of God, to perish for his whole creation. It was once said, the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few. For all those Star Trek fans out there. Think about what Spock said in their movie there at the time. But he would sacrifice his life for his crew, if you ever watched that. But anyway, this was a choice that was set before our gracious and loving God. It was prophesied long ago that God was going to give his son to mankind. He was going to be sacrificed. Every human, it was going to perish because of their sins. But how could God allow, every human to die in this eternal torment for their sins, as each of us ought to do, or God would allow Jesus to die for our sins? He would die for the world. Anyway, thank God that he did allow that. So noticing here that, God decided that, it's better here for his son to die. And in verse 52, notice, "And not for that nation only, but that also he should gather together in one the children of God that were scattered abroad." Noticing here, Jesus would die for the world, so that each person could be gathered into one family as the children of God. Now, how beautiful is that? Sin separates us from God. Jesus would reunite them back to the Father. And so the council, rather than understanding what Jesus had come to do and believing in him, they decided that, hey, we're going to kill him. We're going to put him to death. Even though that's all part of the plan, isn't it? In verse 53. And verse 53 says, "Then from that day forth they took counsel together for to put him to death." For already, we've noticing so far that they have been trying to arrest him, they've been trying to stone him repeatedly, but now their effort will intensify. They see a Roman intervention against the nation coming if they do not kill Jesus soon, and so they're going to kill him. They're going to do these things. Now, you think about this, this is what happens, in our hearts. We either draw closer to Jesus, believing in him, or we're going to try to get rid of him, trying to push him out of our life. But noticing here, Jesus did not walk openly among the Jews. Notice in verse 54, he says, "Jesus therefore walked no more openly among the Jews, but went thence unto a country near to the wilderness, into a city called Ephraim, and there continued with his disciples." Now, Jesus knows the hearts of men. He knows what's going on. He removed himself. Jesus would not allow them to arrest him. He was going to allow him to kill him yet. Now until that he was ready to give his life to the people, his life to the nation, to everyone. So noticing there in verse 55, "And the Jews' Passover was nigh at hand, and many went out of the country up to Jerusalem before the Passover, to purify themselves." Now, verse 55 tells us that it is the Passover. Now, we kind of talked about that already, but the Passover required all the male Jews to return to Jerusalem. So, Jesus is going to come back to the city. It is time for that. In many ways, the imagery, that Passover lamb to be slain for the people. And Jesus is that lamb that's going to be slain. And it's very ironic that people are purifying themselves in preparation for the Passover, but Their hearts in many ways needed to be purified as the Jewish leaders are plotting to kill Jesus. But notice now in verse 56. Then sought they for Jesus and spake among themselves as they stood in the temple, why think ye that he will not come to the feast? So notice there in verse 56, it shows another problem and a common reaction that shows in many ways that people didn't really believe in Jesus at all. But the people are simply spectators. They want to see if Jesus is going to come to Jerusalem for the Passover. And you can think about that. Why do they care? Why do they care if he comes there? They just want to see what's going to happen next. They're not giving their lives to Jesus. They do not love Jesus, but they just want to watch and see what's going to happen. Again, there were many who wanted to kill him. But notice there in verse 57, he says, now both the chief priests and the Pharisees had given a commandment that if any man knew where he were, he should show it, that they might take him. So notice here, Jesus, I guess in other words, Jesus is alive. Jesus is an outlaw. You want to call him that. He's wanted. He's wanted. The people have been told to tell the leaders where he is if they see him. But as Isaiah prophesied, Jesus is numbered with the outlaws. In Isaiah chapter 53, verse 12. Isaiah does say that. But the die is cast and the scene is set forth for Jesus to give his life for the world. So when we think about this, it's a great even lesson for us. Do we believe in him? Do we obey him? I think in every day of our life, there's always that choice that if we're going to follow him, and we're going to reject him. And we see those reactions of these people. Some believe in him, some believe what he was doing, some obey him, but there's others who didn't believe in him. There's others who were just had already in their minds that they were going to reject him, that they were going to kill him. Already in their hearts that they make that decision. But Jesus is that life, and he's always talked about that he is that life, he's a giver of life, he's that bread of life, he is that water of life. But he has to die for many, he has to die for everyone. And no one is going to take that away. And again, we talked about that, right? We talked about that Jesus not only is he the giver of life, but he's also what? Over sheep. He's a shepherd. And we look at that, and as a shepherd of the sheep, he lays down his life. Notice that. Does it voluntarily. And it also says there that he also takes it up again. He has the right to do that. Father gives him that power. Take his life back up again. Because he rose again, and he rose from the dead.
There are some people that believe in God. They don't believe in Jesus.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That's what he said. The Bible says that we are one.
Mm-hmm. They are, and it's really, I guess it's not that hard to believe, but, there are people out there, like you said, they just believe in God, but they don't believe in Jesus. Some will even say that Jesus is just a prophet. We'll get into that with the Mormons believe that Jesus was just a prophet that just came. I believe also the Muslim people, they believe that Jesus was just a prophet. After Jesus, it was Muhammad. Thank you very much. Muhammad. And then you also have, I won my mind. Oh yes, you have the Jehovah's Witness as well. Jehovah's Witness.
Oh.
Yeah, they just believe Jesus was just a name. That's it. But any more thoughts? Any more things? Good thoughts. Good thoughts.
You talk about the names of Jesus, I know you talk about like he's the good shepherd and he's the lay down his life. But have you ever seen the part where they go through the Bible and all the names that he given to him? Prince of Peace, I can't even fathom all the names that we give to Jesus when referring to Jesus. And it's just like Counselor, Prince of Peace, Wonderful, all those names that was given to him are just true.
Mhm.
every special things.
He truly did. And he was called back. So called him back. Still doesn't, still rejected. But I mean, that's how it is. I mean, when you have a hardened heart, or when you're just, when you're stubborn, that stubbornness is just right in front of you, and you're not going to see nothing else. And that's just how it is with some people. Any more thoughts? Any more thoughts? These are good thoughts. These are all good thoughts. Before we move on into the next chapter. We're still going to be talking about stubborn people. So in John chapter 12, maybe Bible readers. Thank you. I'll make sure to talk with Terry to put that fruit basket. So, in John chapter 12, in this text, we're going to kind of notice the contrast with hearts. We're going to notice the contrast of value, placed on Jesus. Both of these people, what we'll notice, are disciples of Jesus, and one will show a heart of love and sacrifice, while the other will show a heart of selfishness and greed. And we're going to notice in just a second here. So, in verses 1 through 3. Then Jesus, 6 days before the Passover, came to Bethany, where Lazarus was, which had been dead, whom he raised from the dead. There they made him a supper, and Martha served, but Lazarus was one of them that sat at the table with him. Then took Mary a pound of ointment, a spikenard, very costly, and anointed the feet of Jesus, and wiped his feet with her hair, and the house was filled with the odor of the ointment. So John 12 here begins by telling us that it is 6 days before the Passover. Jesus' time on earth is nearly done. And Jesus has come to the Passover again. He's that lamb on behalf of the people. Because the Passover is approaching, Jesus came to Bethany, where Mary and Martha and Lazarus were. So we know that in the last chapter, coming to Bethany is a dangerous thing. Because again, there are people who want to kill him. But even though his disciples are very aware of the danger, Jews being in Judea, and again, he's only about 2 miles away from Jerusalem, where they are in Bethany. But with Jesus coming to Bethany, they gathered for dinner with Jesus. And that's something that's really nice, imagine. Martha served, and Lazarus was one of those who was reclining, I guess, at the table. And we can imagine Martha serving Jesus in her way, in her abilities, and Mary is also serving Jesus in her own way and abilities as well. But notice here, verse 3, we see what she is doing. Mary took an expensive ointment made from this pure oil, and she's going to anoint Jesus' feet. And she's going to be wiping this very expensive ointment on the feet of Jesus with her hair. The flask that contained this fragrant perfume would have been about the size of maybe a soda can, possibly. But she breaks open this contents of this oil for the feet of Jesus. And of course, when you open up some oils, fragrant stuff, it fills up the house. That sweet apple and cinnamon that you get going in the kitchen, and it just fills up the whole house. Anyway, but it smells really good in the house. So again, noticing here, they are serving Jesus here, and Martha is doing that. Lazarus is at the table talking with Jesus, which again, John makes it very clear that this man is dead. Now he's alive. Can you imagine that? Person was dead for 4 days. Now it's a thing. Isn't that neat? And it was a loved one. I know many of us would probably want to have that another dinner with our loved one who's passed. Poor friend.
His flesh had already decayed, when they spoke to him.
Yeah.
It's just, hard bound.
Yeah, it was already decomposing and all that.
Just how old like he was.
Yeah. It's amazing, and it's a beautiful scene here with them all here together once again, and we see this great love that Jesus, he loves his disciples, he loves us all. He's even there with them.
What would you do with that?
So,
Let's just hate to think what we do with that.
Mhm.
Having Christ in your life.
Mhm.
Well, he said,
Yes, we always need Jesus in our life, because without him, we are utterly lost. All right. So let's notice here, verse 4 and 5, and we see this generous heart that's doing these things for Jesus, serving Jesus, sacrificing this oil. Could have been something else with this oil. You can kind of notice. But now let's notice another different one. In verse 4 and 5. Then saith one of his disciples, Judas Iscariot, Simon's son, which should betray him, why was not this ointment sold for 300 pence and given to the poor? Notice now, finally the betrayer's on the scene. Judas interrupts the scene, we can imagine, and says, why wasn't this ointment sold for 300 pence and given to the poor? Noticing here, this is very. We can think about this and we can kind of say, well, that's pretty righteous, You can sell it and give it to the poor and that. But of course, he's basically saying, what a waste. She should have sold this ointment for a year's worth of wages. That would have been about 300 denarii worth. This would have been worth about, if today, if you can imagine, it would have been between 30,000, 40,000. Think about that for a second. Kind of imagine why she said all that. But noticing here, Jesus looks at what just happened and he thinks in his mind, this is just a waste. You waste some really good oil that you could have sold. You could have given to the poor. And of course, Judas, he presents this criticism in the form of a righteous sounding criticism. Think about what would have been done with that expensive ointment. It could have been sold, it could have been to good use. Could have used it to fix things, to build things. Could have used this for a church bus. Could have used this for, to get a new sound system. Could have used this for something for the church building. Brother, we can fill all the little gaps within there. But noticing here, but God will not allow us to think that Judas has a pure motive, because Judas, as we already know, he does not. And John makes it clear that he is a betrayer of Jesus. But now noticing here in verse 6, this he said, not that he cared for the poor, but because he was a thief, and had the bag to bear what was put in. So notice here in verse 6 makes it clear that Judas did not care about the poor. Notice that. Rather, he was a thief. He was in charge of the money bag. The point is that Judas wanted this ointment sold, this $30,000 to $40,000, that he could have stolen, that he could have pocketed some of that money for himself, to help himself. So when we think about this, do you think that Jesus knew that Judas was a thief? No. Jesus knew that. He knew all things about men's hearts. I'm pretty sure that he knew Jesus, or what was within Judas' heart, which we're going to kind of notice in just a moment. Well, we're going to have to hold it there. You guys read ahead, and then we're going to finish up all that. And think about that. Think about the contrast here. One who gives and sacrifices their life, or talk about something on behalf of Jesus, to an individual who is selfish, individuals just think about their own personal gain. Maybe next time we'll have some thoughts about that. We'll finish up. Thank you.
you know,